I stood at the entrance of Vincent Cross's private hangar office, my palms slick with sweat, heart pounding in my chest. The thick portfolio of documents I held felt heavier with each passing second. I had worked 12 years to get here, 12 years of late nights and early mornings, of pushing boundaries and pouring everything I had into innovations that no one even knew existed. Today, I was finally going to ask for what I deserved. I had done everything for this company. My algorithm had changed everything, transforming our flight control systems, making our drones more efficient, more precise. I had become the backbone of our success. A silent contributor, my name lost among the data and codes. But today, that was going to change. I had fought for this moment, prepared for it. I would ask for a raise, just 10%. Nothing extravagant, just a recognition of my value. I knocked lightly before entering, the sound reverberating in the massive space. Vincent Cross, the founder of Orion Dynamics, was lounging behind his large desk. A leather chair tilted back casually. His office was as ostentatious as the man himself, windows showing off the expansive hangar floor filled with rows of drones. Some of them were powered by the very software I had created. I walked in, trying to steady my breathing. "Ah, Bianca," Vincent greeted, not looking up from his desk. His voice was smooth, the tone a mixture of casual authority and an air of self-assuredness. "What can I do for you?" I placed the portfolio gently on the desk. "I wanted to discuss my contributions and the future moving forward," I began, trying to sound confident, even though the nerves were eating me alive. "I've been with Orion for 12 years, and I think it's time we revisited my compensation." Vincent finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over me with a half-smirk, like I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He let out a low, dismissive laugh. "Bianca, let me stop you right there," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "What do you think you're asking for exactly? 10%? For what exactly? You're not a senior executive. You're not the one leading this company. He paused, clearly considering the right word. "Support staff. You know, the kind of people the board doesn't even know exist." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My face burned, but I forced myself to keep calm. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the realization that all the work, the long hours, the sacrifice, I was still invisible to him. He didn't even see me. The silence stretched as I stood there, holding on to my dignity, fighting to not let the sting of humiliation show. "Well, you asked," Vincent continued, turning back to his computer, clearly uninterested in my response. "You can try your luck elsewhere. This is the reality, Bianca. You're replaceable." I nodded stiffly, gathered my documents, and turned to leave. There was nothing left to say. As I walked past the rows of drones, my drones, powered by my software, I could feel my resolve solidify. His arrogance didn't break me. If anything, it pushed me to prove him wrong. I would find my worth, somewhere, somehow. I wasn't just support staff. Not anymore. My workstation was in a quiet corner of the engineering bay, where the clinking of tools and the hum of machines filled the air. The room had always felt like a temporary home for me, but now it felt suffocating. I set the portfolio down, the pages within it now a symbol of everything I had done and everything I had been denied. My eyes fell on the drones through the glass windows, all of them operating thanks to the algorithm I had written. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Vincent had no idea how much power I held, how much I had given to make his company what it was, how easily he brushed me off. A sudden clarity surged within me. I wasn't going to be dismissed. Not anymore. This was just the beginning. I grabbed my phone and pulled up a number I had saved months ago, a number I had kept on hand for a rainy day. It was time to make a call. I returned to my corner desk in the engineering bay, the hum of machines filling the empty space around me. The draft from the old windows made the room feel colder, even though it was well into summer. Only 2 engineers remained in this once bustling section, myself and a young intern who barely spoke. The others had been laid off after the company made some questionable cuts that had saved Vincent money but ultimately cost us, the innovators, everything. I sank into my chair, the weight of what had just happened still sitting heavy on my chest. Vincent's laughter echoed in my mind. "Try your luck elsewhere." A small, bitter laugh escaped me. It wasn't luck I needed. It was recognition. And I would find it. even if I had to carve it out myself. I unlocked the drawer to my left, pulling out the journal I kept hidden, my personal project journal, the one where I had documented everything I'd worked on outside of company hours, the stabilization systems, the predictive targeting AI that had put our drones on the map, all created on my own time, on my own hardware. I flipped through the pages, each entry marked with timestamps, proof that I had done this on my own, away from the watchful eyes of a company that cared more about profits than the people behind its success. I had documented every breakthrough I made, every idea that turned into something groundbreaking. My fingers brushed over the page detailing my work on the flight control algorithm, the one Vincent had taken credit for when it landed us a major defense contract. His arrogance burned a hole in my gut as I thought about it again. "Try your luck elsewhere," he had said. Maybe it was time I did. Just then, a ping from my email broke my concentration. I clicked it open and my blood ran cold. A press release from Orion Dynamics, Vincent Cross and team celebrate major defense contract win. The software driving the success, my software. The one I had coded late at night, in the quiet solitude of my apartment, long after the office had emptied. Vincent was taking full credit for my work, and I was the invisible woman behind the curtain. Rage surged through me, but it was different this time. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. I had built something real, something that mattered, and it was time to stop letting it be dismissed. I scrolled through my phone and found the number I'd saved months ago, the one I had been hesitant to use. Mark Ellison, CTO of Apex Aeronautics. He had reached out to me before, expressing interest in my work. I had ignored his offer then, thinking I still had time, thinking things would get better. But now, after everything that had happened, I wasn't waiting anymore. With a steady hand, I dialed the number. The phone rang, and I found myself holding my breath. "Bianca?" Mark's voice was calm but warm when he answered. "Good to hear from you. I was just thinking about you." "I think it's time we talk," I said, my voice firm with purpose. "I'm ready to move forward. I'm interested in the offer you made before. But this time, I need more than just a job. I need the freedom to create, to protect my work. I need the recognition I've earned." There was a pause on the other end, and then Mark's response came, clear and eager. "We can make that happen. Let's set up a time to meet. I think you'll find Apex has a lot to offer, and will respect your work, every step of the way." I felt the weight in my chest lift. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the verge of something real, something that would finally let me be seen, truly seen, for the work I had done. "I'll be there," I said quietly, my voice resolute. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my worth. And this time, I wasn't going to be laughed out of it. The upscale executive lounge was a world apart from the sterile, humming engineering bay I had left behind. The dim, ambient lighting of the lounge and the soft clinking of glasses added an air of sophistication that felt foreign to me, but not unwelcome. It was here, in this polished, pristine space, that I would meet Mark Ellison, the CTO of Apex Aeronautics, the rival aerospace company that had been eyeing me for months. I wasn't nervous. I had crossed a line when I left Vincent's office. No more waiting for permission, no more being dismissed. I was moving forward, and this meeting was just the first step. When Mark arrived, his presence was as polished as the environment around us. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit that looked as if it had been made for him. He smiled when he saw me, his handshake firm. "Bianca," he said, offering a seat. "It's good to finally meet you in person. I've been following your work for a while now, and I have to say, we've been impressed. Apex has been working on a similar project, but we've hit a wall. Your drone stabilization systems, your predictive targeting AI, they're exactly what we need." I sat down, my posture straight, my hands resting on the edge of the table. I had known where this conversation was headed, but hearing it from him still felt surreal. He continued, his voice calm and assured. "We've actually tried to reverse engineer some of your systems, but we haven't had the same success. That's why I wanted to talk to you directly. I'd like to offer you a position with us. We'd make you a director. Triple the salary you're earning now, full IP acquisition rights, and most importantly, your name on every patent you file." He paused, allowing his words to settle in. "We respect your work. At Apex, we believe in compensating talent properly. We want you to bring your innovations here, and we'll ensure they're treated with the respect they deserve. I stared at him, my mind processing his offer. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to reclaim everything I had been denied. Triple the salary, recognition, and most importantly, control over my intellectual property, something Vincent had never respected. I pulled my notebook from my bag and slid it across the table to Mark. "This is what I've been working on," I said, flipping it open to the entries documenting my work. Entries marked with timestamps, proving that the systems he was referring to were my own personal projects, developed on my own time, with my own resources. Mark took the notebook, his eyes scanning the pages, his brow furrowed slightly as he read the timestamps. When he looked up, there was a look of respect in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. This is impressive. We'd be lucky to have you," he said, his voice sincere. "We understand the value of what you've built, Bianca, and we'll make sure you're compensated fairly, both now and in the future. We won't treat you like the last company did." I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself to feel the weight of the decision. I had come this far. There was no going back. Mark had given me everything I had asked for, the recognition, the power, and the compensation I deserved. I extended my hand, meeting his gaze with newfound clarity. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm. "Let's make this happen." As we shook hands, I felt a sense of finality. This wasn't just about a job. It was about proving to myself and to everyone who had ever underestimated me that I was more than just the support staff they had made me out to be. I was a force to be reckoned with, and now I had the platform to show it. Mark smiled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Welcome to Apex, Bianca. I think you'll find we're more than ready for what you bring to the table." And with that, my new life began. 2 days later, I was standing outside Vincent's office again. This time, it was to hand in my resignation. I had done my part, drafted my letter, signed it, and made sure everything was in order. I had no desire for a grand confrontation. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to leave. I knocked once, a quick, sharp sound, and stepped in before he could look up. Vincent didn't seem to notice me at first. His fingers tapped rhythmically on his keyboard as he browsed through a series of emails. His office, as usual, was a shrine to his success. Leather chairs, polished wood. The faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. "Vincent," I said, my voice even, but firm. Finally, he glanced up, and his face broke into a lazy grin. "Bianca, good to see you. What can I—" "I'm resigning," I interrupted before he could finish. I could see his amusement falter. For a long moment, Vincent just stared at me. It wasn't disbelief, not really, more like a casual annoyance that he had to deal with something he considered beneath him. "Resigning? You? Seriously?" he chuckled. Leaning back in his chair, his gaze scanning me like I was some minor inconvenience. "Well, I suppose you're free to do what you want. I'm sure Apex will be more than happy to take you in. They always need more drones." I nodded, a tight smile on my lips. "Actually, I'm joining Apex Aeronautics," I said, my tone leaving no room for doubt. "They're our biggest competitor, Vincent. The systems I created, the ones that have secured your biggest contract bid, they're all mine. You might want to look into that." His face changed, just for a second. His eyes flicked down to his desk, his mind obviously working overtime. When he spoke again, it was more measured, less cocky. "You think you're irreplaceable, don't you?" he said, his tone suddenly colder. "I've got an entire team that can replicate whatever you've done. If you want to leave, that's your choice." I folded my arms, my posture straight. "You never understood what I brought to this company, Vincent. But I did everything to make sure you knew my worth. You just couldn't see it." There was a flicker of frustration in his eyes, but he hid it quickly, leaning back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. "You think Apex is going to give you anything more than I have?" "No," I said, calm but resolute. "They'll give me what you couldn't: respect, control over my work, and the ability to grow. And they don't dismiss their top people as support staff." His face twitched as I mentioned that phrase again. The one he had thrown at me just days ago. I wasn't going to let him forget it. He sat still for a moment, clearly weighing his options. "Look, Bianca," he said slowly, his voice laced with an unspoken threat. "If you want to leave, I can't stop you, but you're making a mistake. You could stay here, work with me, and we could— I'm done, I said, cutting him off. I'm not going to waste any more time here. Apex respects my work, Vincent. They'll treat me how I deserve to be treated. Vincent stared at me for another long moment before he looked away, clearly done with the conversation. Fine. You want to leave? Go. But don't expect me to beg you to stay. I handed him the resignation letter, the final step. I've already made up my mind. And by the way, I added, pausing as I turned to leave, I'll be training my replacement. Don't worry about it. He didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind me, and I felt the last of the tension I had been carrying release. The worst part was over. I had taken the first step toward my future, and there was no turning back now. As I walked down the empty hallways, I felt a sense of quiet dignity settle over me. I had given them everything I could, and now it was time to take back what was mine. 6 weeks had passed since I started at Apex Aeronautics, and already the changes were staggering. The first project I spearheaded, implementing my own drone stabilization system, had slashed production costs by 30% and improved targeting precision by 40%. The results were undeniable. Apex was winning contracts left and right, and most satisfying of all, we had just secured the military contract that Vincent's company, Orion Dynamics, had been counting on. The news was everywhere. Headlines screamed of Apex's bold moves and cutting-edge technology, while Orion's struggles grew more apparent by the day. I was on top of the world, but even amidst the praise, there was something gnawing at me. Vincent's frantic calls, now more frequent than ever, were piling up in my inbox. I hadn't responded. I didn't need to. He had made his choice, dismissing me like I was nothing. But now, as I drove through the sleek, modern parking garage of Apex, I saw him, Vincent. He stood near the elevators, hands in his pockets. His eyes locked on me as I stepped out of my car. His suit was the same expensive cut he'd always worn, but his demeanor was different. Tired, desperate. I could feel the familiar flicker of discomfort in my stomach, but I didn't let it stop me. "Bianca," he called out, his voice loud in the quiet garage. "I need to talk to you." I didn't stop walking. He was following me now, his shoes clicking sharply against the polished concrete. I glanced at him over my shoulder, my pace steady. "What's the matter, Vincent?" I asked, my voice cool but measured. "Did you run out of people to blame for your company's collapse?" His face reddened. "You think this is funny? You left, and now you're sabotaging us from the inside. You're stealing from us, Bianca. This whole thing, it's theft." I stopped in my tracks, turning to face him fully. He was close now, his chest heaving with frustration. But I stood taller, stronger. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said, keeping my tone even, my eyes locked onto his. "You never cared about my work, Vincent. You never even acknowledged it. All I ever asked for was a little respect. But you dismissed me. You said I was replaceable, and now you're reaping the consequences of your arrogance." His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak for a moment. His eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in him before, genuine concern. Or maybe it was just panic. He was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated everything. Now it was slipping from his grasp, and it was clear he didn't know how to handle it. "You don't understand," he said, his voice quiet. "I've built this company. It's mine." "No," I corrected, my voice firm. "You've managed it, but you didn't build it, Vincent. You took credit for other people's work. You neglected your talent and watched it walk away." Vincent's expression shifted. He looked like a man who had suddenly realized how deeply he had misjudged me, how out of touch he had been with his own company's backbone, the very people he had always considered disposable. I took a step forward, narrowing the distance between us. "And you said everyone was replaceable." "Well, you were right, Vincent," I added, my voice calm but with a sharp edge. "Even you." I turned, walking away from him without a second glance. He didn't call after me. He didn't need to. He knew. I had taken the reins of my own life, and there was no going back now. As I walked through the parking garage doors, the weight that had held me down for so long felt lighter, like a burden I had finally shed. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was worth something, and in that moment, I was more certain than ever that my decision to leave Orion had been the right one. It was no longer about revenge. It was about control. control over my career, my work, my future. And that, finally, was enough. The first signs of collapse at Orion Dynamics came quietly, whispers in the industry, then the sudden layoffs. Over 100 people, from engineers to support staff, found themselves without a job. The press release painted a rosy picture of restructuring, but it was clear to anyone who knew the company that the true story was one of mismanagement. Vincent's empire was unraveling, and the headlines had begun to reflect that. Meanwhile, at Apex, I was thriving. My systems were working exactly as promised, improving production efficiency, reducing costs, and pushing our drones to new heights. My team at Apex respected me, trusted me, and most importantly, treated me like a valuable asset. I could already feel the weight of my success settling in. I had built something here, and it felt right. But the success was bittersweet. As Orion collapsed, I couldn't shake the gnawing guilt. I had left behind colleagues, friends who were now scrambling to find work. I had worked with them for years, and many of them were just as talented, just as capable as anyone at Apex. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I couldn't forget that I had been part of the machine that had built Orion's success. Now, it seemed, I was partly responsible for its downfall. And then one day, Sandra walked into Apex. Sandra and I had worked together for years at Orion. She was in avionics support, a department that was now wiped out along with most of the engineering teams. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn. The moment she stepped into the lobby, I knew something was wrong. "Bianca," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I led her to one of the quieter meeting rooms. As we sat, Sandra's eyes searched mine, then dropped to her hands. I waited, letting the silence stretch. Finally, she spoke. "You think you've won, don't you?" Her words were harsh, her voice thick with emotion. "I see what you're doing here, and it's great. But what about the rest of us? What about the people we left behind? My team? We were your co-workers, your friends, and now you're part of the company that took our jobs. How do you live with that?" I felt the weight of her accusation, the sharp sting of guilt piercing through the confidence I'd built. I had moved on, but she hadn't. She was right. The fallout wasn't just about contracts and systems. It was about people. My decisions had cost them their livelihoods. "I didn't want this," I said softly, my voice betraying my discomfort. I didn't want anyone to lose their job. But Vincent, he made choices, and those choices led to this. Sandra shook her head. "Don't play the victim, Bianca. You chose to leave. And now you're here, with your shiny new job, your new systems, while we're struggling." She paused, her words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. Was it worth it? Was it worth leaving everyone behind just to climb higher? Her question hit harder than anything Vincent had ever said to me. Was it worth it? The truth was, I didn't know. It had never been just about the job. It had been about finally being valued, about finally being seen for what I had built. But now, seeing Sandra in front of me, I couldn't shake the sense that I had left something behind. A part of myself, a part of the people I had worked with for so long. "I can offer you a consulting role," I said, the words slipping out before I could fully think them through. "If you want to be part of this, to help us rebuild the systems we're working on here, I'll make sure you're compensated properly. You don't have to stay in limbo." Sandra's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. She didn't look grateful. She didn't look angry. She just looked lost. "I'm not interested in your money, Bianca," she said, standing up. "You'll never understand what it's like, being the one who stayed behind. Maybe you'll figure that out someday." Before I could respond, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. As the door clicked shut behind her, I sat back in my chair, feeling the full weight of what I had done. I had moved on, but the people who stayed behind were still struggling. The collapse of Orion had been inevitable, yes, but was my success here at Apex worth the lives left behind in the rubble? I sat at my desk, scrolling through my inbox, the weight of my success at Apex hanging heavy on my shoulders. My system had revolutionized the way we built drones, cutting costs and increasing precision in ways no one had expected. The contracts were rolling in. I had won. Apex had won. But as Orion Dynamics continued to collapse, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had been lost in the process. The layoffs, Over 100 people, engineers, support staff, management, had been let go in the wake of the company's plummeting stock prices. I had watched from the sidelines, helpless, as one of my former coworkers after another lost their jobs. And I couldn't stop thinking about how I had been part of that. It was easy to blame Vincent, to place the responsibility on him. After all, he was the one who had created a company culture of exploitation. But deep down, I knew that the collapse wasn't just about one man's mismanagement. It was a system built on the backs of the very people who were now paying the price. And I had benefited from that system, just as much as I had been exploited by it. I needed to do something. It was time to turn my guilt into action. I spent the next few days compiling a database, lists of every former Orion employee who had been laid off, details of their skills, their experience, and their contributions. It was a huge undertaking, but I couldn't sit idly by while my past teammates struggled. I brought the idea to the Apex board, a recovery initiative, something that would offer displaced Orion employees a chance to rebuild their careers and re-enter the industry. We called it Project Phoenix. It was a bold idea, one that would set Apex apart from the competition. Instead of continuing to pick off the talent from Orion's sinking ship, we would open our doors to everyone who had been affected. We'd interview them, offer training programs, and help transition them into new roles. We'd rebuild them, just as I had rebuilt myself. The board approved the project quickly, and soon the media picked up the story. Headlines trumpeted Apex's commitment to ethical leadership and innovation, and job applications flooded in from across the country. It was one of the most successful initiatives we had ever launched, and it did more than just boost our company's reputation. It gave hope to the people who had been left behind by Vincent's reckless decisions. Then Sandra returned. She walked into my office one morning, her expression guarded but less hostile than before. She hesitated before speaking. "I didn't think you'd care," she said, voice soft. I stood, offering her a seat. "I do care, Sandra. I'm sorry for what happened. I never wanted anyone to lose their job." She shook her head, dismissing my apology. "It's not about that. It's about what I've seen here, what Apex is doing, the way you've changed things." I watched her carefully, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "So, what are you saying?" "I've thought about it," Sandra said, "and I'd like to take you up on your offer. I'd like to join Project Phoenix." Her words hit me harder than I expected. This was a different Sandra from the one who had confronted me months ago. The anger had faded, replaced by something more complicated. Hope, maybe. Or maybe just a need to rebuild, just like I had. I extended my hand. "Welcome aboard." And just like that, one more piece of the past fell into place. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. As Project Phoenix gained traction, Sandra and I worked side by side, helping former colleagues regain their footing, offering them opportunities to thrive once again. It was a bittersweet process, but with each success, I could feel the weight of my guilt lessen. At the end of the day, it wasn't just about fixing the mistakes of the past. It was about building something better for the future. Something that valued people, not just technology. The cafe was quiet, its air thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of hushed conversations. I sat across from Ellis, the former legal officer from Orion. He had reached out to me after the company had gone under, offering a piece of information that he believed would give me clarity. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. But now, sitting face to face with him, I realized how much I needed to hear what he had to say. Ellis was older than I remembered, his face more lined, his eyes tired but sharp. He had always been someone who worked quietly in the background, out of the spotlight. But now, as he leaned in, I saw the weight of his own guilt and regret. "Bianca," he began, his voice low, "there's something you need to know. Vincent always knew about your intellectual property rights. He knew exactly what he was doing when he took credit for your work." I felt a rush of cold anger flood through me, but I forced myself to stay still, to let him speak. "He ignored your rights deliberately. He knew that the systems you were developing on your own time were yours, but he chose to bury that fact. When you offered to sell them to the company years ago, he dismissed it. He thought you'd never leave. He assumed you'd always be loyal, and that's why he didn't take you seriously." The room seemed to narrow around me. My mind was racing, memories from the past flooding back. I had offered to sell my systems to Orion. I had even made it clear that I expected fair compensation. But Vincent had brushed me off, assumed I was nothing more than an engineer willing to do whatever was asked. Bianca, Ellis continued, his voice growing heavier. Vincent didn't want to share credit. He wanted it all for himself. And when you left, when you took your work elsewhere, he panicked. He tried to cover up his own failure with that lawsuit. But you were never in the wrong. I leaned back, absorbing his words. So the company's downfall wasn't because of me. It wasn't because I had stolen from them or betrayed them. The collapse of Orion had come because of the rot at its core, because Vincent and his leadership had refused to recognize their talent, to properly compensate the people who made their success possible. Do you realize what you did, Ellis? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You could have spoken up sooner. You could have done the right thing. Ellis sighed deeply, and for the first time, I saw the shame in his eyes. I should have, I know, but I didn't want to risk my job. I didn't want to make waves. By the time I realized how badly things were being handled, it was already too late. I nodded slowly, understanding. It's too late for a lot of us, I said, bitterness creeping into my words. He was quiet for a moment before speaking again. I've seen the press, Bianca. What you're doing at Apex, it's the right way. They're treating you the way you deserve. I just wanted you to know you were never the problem. Vincent was. He made the choices that led to this. His refusal to respect your work, your rights. It's why he's losing everything. The weight of it settled over me, heavy and undeniable. I had spent so many months questioning whether I had caused this, whether leaving Orion had been the right choice. But now, with Ellis's words ringing in my ears, I realized the truth. The collapse of the company wasn't because of me. It was because of Vincent's decisions, his arrogance, and his unwillingness to properly value his team. So what now, I asked, my voice firmer. What happens to all those people, the ones who lost their jobs because of him? Ellis looked away for a moment before meeting my gaze. I don't know, but what you're doing, bringing over displaced employees, giving them a chance, it's the right thing. I couldn't do that at Orion, but maybe you can do something that will change the industry for the better. I nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle in my chest. The collapse wasn't my fault, but I could still do something to help the people who had been left behind in the wake of Vincent's failure. Thank you, Ellis, I said, standing up, for telling me the truth, and for giving me the clarity I needed. I'll make sure the people who were hurt by this get the chance they deserve. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a shift inside me. I had thought that leaving Orion was the end of something, but now I realized it was just the beginning of rebuilding, of making things right, and of proving that leadership should always come with responsibility. Vincent's calls had become desperate, the tone in his voice more frantic with each passing day. At first, I ignored them, but then, one evening, I found myself standing at the phone, considering whether I should pick up. I knew what he was likely going to ask, and I was ready for it. I answered on the fourth ring. Bianca, his voice came through, tight and pleading. You don't know how bad things are. The company is hemorrhaging money. We're losing contracts left and right. I need you to help us out. I paused, letting his words sink in. There was no trace of the arrogant Vincent I had known for years. Only a man backed into a corner. You want me to help you now, I said, my voice steady but firm. What exactly are you asking for, Vincent? I already gave you everything I had. I was loyal, I worked for you, and what did I get in return? You told me I was replaceable. And now your empire is falling apart. And you want me to come back? He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the tremor in his voice when he spoke again. I'm not asking you to come back, but there's a final wave of staff who could be spared. Before we file for bankruptcy, would you consider hiring them? They deserve better than what's happening. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it didn't change the fact that he had burned every bridge with me. I wasn't going to save him now. No, Vincent, I said, my voice quieter now, but resolute. I'm not doing this for you. But I will help those people. I'll take them in, not because of you, but because they deserve better leadership. His sigh was deep, a mixture of defeat and relief. You always were the one who saw things differently. Thank you, Bianca. The phone call ended, and I sat back, the weight of his words still pressing on me. I wasn't doing this for him, but I knew I had the power to give those people a chance, something Vincent had never done. True to my word, Apex scaled operations, hiring over 150 former Orion employees, including many of my old teammates. It wasn't just about offering jobs. It was about giving them the tools and resources they needed to rebuild their careers, to thrive, not just survive. I'd learned the hard way that leadership wasn't just about technology and contracts. It was about people. The industry was buzzing with the news. Apex was not only leading in innovation, we were setting the standard for ethical leadership, showing that a company could prioritize people over profits without sacrificing success. A month later, at an industry award ceremony, I stood before a crowd of my peers, holding the microphone in my hand. The applause from the crowd was overwhelming, but I couldn't shake the reminder of where I had come from. I owed my success to the very people I had fought for, those who had supported me, and those who had been left behind by an uncaring company. One young engineer approached me afterward, a hopeful look in his eyes. "How do you know when it's time to speak up?" he asked, his voice full of curiosity. I smiled softly, thinking back to everything I'd been through. "When staying silent starts costing you more than the risk," I replied, my voice steady. "You have to speak up. You have to know your worth." As I walked off the stage, I realized just how far I had come. I had fought for my own worth, and in the process, had reshaped an entire industry. And Vincent? He had underestimated me, as he had so many others. But in the end, I wasn't just a piece in his game. I had built my own future, and with it, a legacy that would stand for far longer than his empire ever could. As I looked out over the crowd, I knew the journey wasn't over. I had created a space where people could finally thrive, where they wouldn't have to wait for their worth to be recognized. 2 years had passed since I left Orion Dynamics behind, and in that time, I had built something entirely new at Apex. The drone systems we had developed were now industry-leading, and Apex's reputation had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined. But what I was most proud of wasn't the contracts we had won or the technology we had perfected. It was the people I had helped. I now ran a mentorship program for women in engineering, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the opportunity to start at Orion. In my program, I taught them everything I had learned, the technical skills, the leadership principles, and most importantly, how to fight for their worth. There were young women in this program who would go on to lead breakthrough projects of their own. They would rise faster than I ever had because they wouldn't have to wait a decade to be seen. They would know their value from the start. One morning, as I sat in my office, the phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, but answered anyway. "Bianca." It was Vincent's voice, recognizable but distant. He sounded like a man who had been through a lot. "Vincent," I replied, calm, steady. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about everything, about how I treated you. I was wrong. I should have respected your work. I should have recognized your contributions. And now I see it. What you've done at Apex. I was blind. You were never replaceable." I felt a strange mix of emotions. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I had long since moved past the need for him to admit he had been wrong. But hearing it from him now, it was almost surreal. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "But I didn't need your acknowledgement to know my worth. I've known it for a long time." There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "I know. But I wanted to say it anyway. You've made something incredible, Bianca. I see that now." I hung up after a few more words. Nothing dramatic, nothing filled with the anger I once thought I'd feel. I realized that true revenge wasn't in watching him lose everything. It was in building something better than what he had ever imagined, in creating a space where people were valued for their contributions, not their titles. That afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting with a new group of mentees, one of them handed me a framed article. I recognized the name immediately, Vincent Cross. The headline read, "Apex's Rise, a Story of Innovation, Leadership, and Resilience." I took it from her hands, reading the small print beneath the headline. Vincent Cross acknowledges that the systems driving Apex's success were the product of a vision he failed to recognize at Orion Dynamics. Bianca, the engineer who once built for him, has proven irreplaceable. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of it settling over me. It was both an end and a beginning. Vincent had acknowledged what I had known all along, but more than that, he had recognized the kind of leadership I had worked so hard to create. I hung the article on the wall in my office, right next to the whiteboard where I mapped out my goals for the mentorship program. As I stood back, admiring the framed piece, I thought of everything that had brought me here, the struggles, the fights, the moments of doubt, and how they had led to something far greater than revenge. Know your worth, I had told my mentees so many times, and now, with a quiet smile, I realized that I had done exactly that. And just as I had taught them, I passed on the message. Never let someone laugh you out of it. My legacy wasn't in the rise of Apex or the fall of Orion. It was in the women I mentored, the engineers, the leaders, the dreamers, who would never have to ask for respect again. They would take it, just as I had. In that moment, I knew that I had created a space where no one would ever have to wait a decade to be recognized for their worth, or question whether they deserved it.